This public domain reading is on the Cross, a romance of the Passion Play at Oberammergau by Wilhelmine von Hillern. Chapter 26. THELAST support. There was alarm in the Wildenau Palace. The Countess had suddenly returned without notifying the servants, in plain words without asking the servants' permission. She had intended to remain absent several months. They were not prepared, had nothing ready, nothing cleaned, not even a single room in her suite of apartments heated. She seemed absent-minded, went to her rooms at once, and locked herself in. Then her bell rang violently. The servants who were consulting together below scattered. The maids darted up the main staircase, the men up a side flight. "I want the coachman, Martin," was the unexpected order. "Martin isn't here," the footman ventured to answer. "As we did not know, then send for him," replied the Countess imperiously. She did not appear even to notice the implied reproof. Then she permitted the attendant to make a fire on the hearth, for it was a raw, damp day in early spring, and after her stay in Cannes the weather seemed like Siberia. Half an hour elapsed. Meanwhile the maids were unpacking, and the Countess was arranging a quantity of letters she had brought with her. They were all numbered and of ancient date. Among them was one from Freya, written 4 weeks previously, containing only the words, "Even in death, Josepha has filled a mother's place to our child. She has rested in the chapel with him since this morning. I think you will not object to her being buried there, Joseph?" The Countess again glanced at the letter. Her eyes rested on the errors in orthography. Such tragical information, with so terrible a reproach between the lines, and the effect, a ludicrous one. She would gladly have effaced the mistakes in order not to be ashamed of having given this man so important a part in the drama of her life. But they stood there with the distinctness of a boy's unpracticed hand. A man who could not even write correctly. She had not noticed it before. He wrote rarely and always very briefly. Or had she possessed no eyes for his faults at that time? Yes, she must have been blind, utterly blind. She had not answered the letter. Now she tore it up and threw it into the fire. Josepha's death would have been a deliverance to her had she not a few weeks later received another letter, which she now read once more, panting for breath. But, however frequently she perused its contents, she found only that old Martin entreated her to return. Josepha had blabbed. That one word in the stiff hand of the faithful old servant, which looked as if it might have been scrawled with a match upon paper, redolent of the odours of the stable, had so startled the Countess that she left Cannes by the first train, and travelled day and night to reach home. A nervous restlessness made the sheet tremble in her hand as she thrust it into the flames. Then she paced restlessly to and fro. Martin was keeping her waiting so long. A little supper had been hurriedly prepared and was now served, but the Countess scarcely touched the food and, complaining that the dining-room was cold, crept back to her boudoir. At last, about 9:30, Martin was announced. He had gone to bed, and they had been obliged to rouse him. "Is your Highness going out?" asked the footman, who could not understand the summons to Martin. "If I am, you will receive orders for the carriage," replied his mistress, and a flash from her eyes silenced the servant. "Let Martin come in," she added in a harsh, imperious tone. The man opened the door. "You are dismissed for tonight. The lights can be put out," she added. Martin stood, hat in hand, awaiting his mistress' commands. A few minutes passed. Then the Countess noiselessly went to the door to see that the adjoining rooms were empty and that no one was listening. When she returned, she drew the heavy curtains over the door to deaden every sound. Then her self-control gave way, and rushing to the old coachman, she grasped his hand. "Martin, for heaven's sake, what has happened?" Tears glittered in Martin's eyes as he saw his mistress' alarm, and he took her trembling hands as gently as if they were the reins of a fiery-blooded horse on which a curb has been placed for the first time. "Ho, ho, dear Countess, only keep quiet." "Quiet," he said in the soothing tones used to his frightened steeds. "All is not lost. I didn't let myself be caught, and there's no proof of what Josepha blabbed." "So they tried to catch you? Tell me." She was trembling. "How did they come to you?" "Well," said Martin clumsily, "this is how it was. They seem to have driven Josepha into a corner. At her funeral, the cook told me that just before she died, 2 strangers came to the house and had a long conversation with the sick woman. When the hare she was ordered to cook was done, she carried it up. And the people in the room were talking so loud that she didn't dare go in and stood at the door listening." Something was said about the Countess' favour and a crime, and Josepha was terribly excited. Suddenly she heard nothing more. Josepha stammered a few unintelligible words, and the gentlemen came out with faces as red as fire. They left the hare in the lurch, and off they went. Josepha died the same night. Then I thought they might be the Barons von Wildenau, because their coachman had often tried to pump me about our Countess, and I said to myself, now I'll do the same to him. And sure enough, I found out that the gentleman had gone away, and where? To Prankenberg. The Countess turned pale and sank into an armchair. There, your Highness, don't be troubled, Martin went on calmly. That will do them no good. The church books don't lie open on the tavern tables like bills of fare, and the old pastor will not let everybody meddle with them. The old pastor, cried the Countess despairingly. He is dead, and since my father, the prince, has grown weak-minded, the patronage has lapsed to the government. A new pastor has no motive for showing us any consideration. So the old pastor is dead? Martin, for the first time, shook his head anxiously. If one could only get a word from His Highness the Prince, just to find out whether the marriage was really entered in the record. Yes, if we knew that. Martin smiled with a somewhat embarrassed look. I ventured to take a little liberty, and went. I thought I would try whether I could find out anything from him. Because His Highness, you remember, followed us to Prankenberg. Very true. The Countess nodded in the utmost excitement. Well, alas, it was useless. His Highness doesn't know anybody, can remember nothing. When you go over tomorrow, you will see that he can't live long. His Highness is perfectly childish. Then he got so excited that we thought he would lose his breath, and at last had to be put to bed. I could not help weeping when I saw it, such a stately gentleman, and now so helpless. The Countess listened to this report with little interest. Her father had been nothing to her while he retained his mental faculties. Now, in a condition of slow decay, he was merely a poor invalid to whom she performed the usual filial duties. Go on, she cried impatiently. You are not telling the story in regular order. When did you see my father? A week ago, after my talk with the gentleman. That is the main thing. Tell me about that. Why, it was this way. I was sitting quietly at the tavern one night when Herr von Wildenau's coachman came to me again and said that his master wanted to talk with me about our bay mare with the staggers which he would like to harness with his bay. I was glad that we could get the mare off on him. Fie, Martin. Why? If nobody tried to cheat, there wouldn't be any more horse trading. So I told him I thought the Countess would sell the mare. We had no mate for her, and I would inform your Highness. No, the gentleman would write directly to Her Highness. Only I must go to them. They wanted to talk with me. Well, I went, and they shut all the doors and pulled the curtains over them, just as your Highness did, and then they began on the bay and promised me a big fee if I would get her cheap for them. Every coachman takes a fee, the old man added in an embarrassed tone. It's the custom. You won't be vexed, Countess. So I made myself a bit important and pretended that it depended entirely on me, and I would make Her Highness so dissatisfied with the mare that she would be glad to get rid of her cheap, and all the rest of the things we coachmen say. So the gentleman thought because I bargained with them about one thing, I would about another. But that was quite different from a horse trade, and my employers are no animals to be sold. So they found that they had come to the wrong person. If I would make a little extra money by getting rid of a poor animal, which we had long wanted to sell, I'm not the rascal to take thousands from anybody to deprive my employers of house and home. And the poor old prince, who can no longer help himself, would perhaps be left to starve in his old age. No, the gentlemen were mistaken in old Martin. They don't know what it is. Tears were streaming down the old man's wrinkled cheeks. To put such a little princess on a horse for the first time and place the reins in her tiny hands. Please go on, Martin, said the Countess gently, scarcely able to exert any better control over herself. What did they offer you? A great deal of money, if I would bear witness in court that you were married. Ah! The terrified woman covered her face with her hands. There, Countess, said Martin soothingly. I haven't finished. Hold your head up. Your Highness, I beg you, this is no time to be faint-hearted. We must be on the watch and keep the reins well in hand, that they may not get the start of us. Yes, go on. Well, they tried to catch me napping. They knew everything, and I had been a witness of the wedding at Prankenberg. Good heavens! The Countess seemed paralyzed. Martin laughed. But I didn't let myself be caught. I looked as stupid as if I couldn't bridle a horse, and had never heard of any wedding in all my days, except our princess's marriage to the late Count. Of course I was at the church then, with all the other servants. Then the gentleman muttered something in French, and asked what wages I had, and when I told them, they said they were too low for such rich employers, and began to make me offers till they reached 50,000 marks, if I would state what they wanted. Yes, and then they told me you were capable of marrying 2 men, and meant to take the Duke as well as the steward, and they didn't want to have such a crime in the family, so I must help them prevent it. But this didn't move me at all, and I said, "That's no concern of mine, my mistress knows what to do." So off I went, and left the gentlemen staring like balky horses when they don't want to pass anything. Then I went to the prince, and as I could learn nothing there, I knew of no other way than to write to your highness. I hope you'll pardon the liberty. Oh, Martin, you trusty old servant. Your simple loyalty shames me, but I fear that your sacrifice is useless. They know all, Martin, nothing can save me. Martin smiled craftily into the bottom of his hat, as if it was the source of his wisdom. I think just this. If the gentlemen do know everything, they have got to prove it, for Josepha is dead, and if they had found the information they wanted at Prankenberg, they needn't offer so much money for my testimony. The Countess pressed her hand upon her head. I don't know, I can't think any more. Oh, Martin, how shall I thank you, if the stroke of the pen which will give you the 50,000 marks you scorned to receive from the Wildenau's can repay you? Take it, but I shall still be your debtor. She hurriedly wrote a few words. There is a cheque for 50,000 marks. Cash it early tomorrow morning. Don't delay an hour. Any day may be the last that I shall have anything to give. Take it quickly. But Martin shook his head. Why, what is your highness thinking of? I don't want to be paid, like a bribed witness, for doing only my duty. There would have been no credit in refusing the money if I took it afterward from your highness. No, I thank you most humbly, but I can't do it. The Countess was deeply ashamed. But if I lose my property, Martin, if they begin a suit, I can no longer reward your fidelity. Have you considered that everything can be taken from me if they succeed in proving that I am married? Martin nodded. Yes, I know our late master's will. I believe he was jealous and wanted to prevent the Countess from marrying again. But you needn't be troubled about me. I've saved enough to buy a little home which, in case of need, might shelter the Countess and her Freya too. I have had it all from you. Martin's broad face beamed with joy at the thought. Martin? She could say no more. Martin did not know what had happened. Surely the skies would fall. The Countess had sunk upon his breast, the broad old breast in which throbbed such a stupid, honest heart. He stood as motionless as a post or the pile of a bridge to which a drowning person clings. But during all the 65 years his honest heart had beat under the Prankenberg livery, it had never throbbed so violently as at this moment. His little princess. She was in his arms again, as in the days when he placed her in the saddle for the first time. Then she wept and clung to him whenever the horse made a spring. But he held her firmly, and she felt safe in his care. Now she again wept and clung to him in helpless terror. But now she was a stately woman who had outgrown his protection. There, Countess, he said soothingly. God will help you. Go to rest. You are wearied by the long journey. Tomorrow you will see everything with very different eyes, and, as I said before, if all the ropes break, then you will find lodging with old Martin. You always liked peasants' fare. Don't you remember how you used to slip into the coachman's little room and shared my bread and cheese till the governess found it out and spoiled our fun? Yes, bread and cheese were forbidden dainties, and yet they were God's gift which even the poorest might enjoy. You must remember the coachman's little room and how they tasted. Well, we haven't gone so far yet, and your highness' friends will not suffer it. Yet, if matters ever did come to that, I believe your highness would rather accept a home from me than from any of these noblemen. You may be right there, said the Countess with a thoughtful nod. May God guard your highness from either. Has your highness any farther orders? Yes, my good Martin. Go early tomorrow morning to the prince, or rather the Duke of Metten-Barnheim, and ask him to call on me at 10 o'clock. Alas, the Duke went to shoot black cock this morning. I suppose he didn't know that your highness was coming. Certainly not. How long will he be away? Till the end of the week, his coachman told me. This too, she stood in helpless despair. The coachman said that his highness was going to Castle Sternbach. Perhaps your highness might telegraph there. Yes, my good old friend, you are right. And with eager haste she wrote a telegram. There it is, Martin, it will reach him somewhere. And she remembered the message dispatched 9 years before, after the Passion Play, to the man whom she was now recalling as her last support. At that time she informed him that she should stay in Amagor and let the roses awaiting her at home wither. Now she remained at home and let the roses that bloomed for her in Amagor languish. The coachman, as if reading the mute language of her features and the bitter expression of her compressed lips, asked timidly, "I suppose your highness will not drive to the Grease?" "No," she said, so curtly and hastily that it cut short any farther words. For the first time a shadow flitted over honest Martin's face. Sadly, almost reproachfully, he wished his beloved mistress a good night's rest and stumbled wearily out. It had hurt him, but the last thing he had discovered. He did not venture, out of respect to his employer, to express even to himself. Chapter 27. Between poverty and disgrace. 3 weary days had passed. The Countess was ill. At least she permitted her household to believe that she was unable to leave her room. No one was allowed to know that she had returned, and the windows of the Wildenau Palace remained closed, as when the owner was absent, thus condemned to total inactivity in the twilight of her apartments, she became the helpless prey of her gnawing anxiety. A third day brought a glimmer of hope, a telegram from the Duke. "I will come at 6 this evening." The Countess trembled and turned pale as she read the lines. What was to be done now? She did not know. She only felt that the turning point of her life had come. "The Duke of Metten-Barnheim will call this evening and must be admitted, but no one else," were the orders given to the servant. Then, to pass away the time, she changed her dress. If she was to be poor and miserable, to possess nothing she formerly owned, she would at least be beautiful. Beautiful as the setting sun which irradiates everything with rosy light. And with the true feminine vanity which coquettes with death and finds a consolation in being beautiful even in the coffin, she chose for the momentous consultation impending one of the most bewitching negligee costumes in her rich wardrobe. Ample folds of rose-coloured crêpe de chine were draped over an underdress of pink plush, which reflected 1,000 shades from the deepest rose to the palest flesh colour, the whole drapery loosely caught with single grey pearls. How long would she probably possess such garments? She perhaps wore it today for the last time. Her trembling hand was icy cold, as she wound a pink ribbon through her curls and fastened it with a pearl clasp. There she stood, like Aphrodite, risen from the foam of the sea, and she smiled bitterly. She could not even raise herself from the mire into which a single error had lured her. Then she was again overwhelmed by an unspeakable consciousness of misery, her disgrace, which made all her splendour seem a mockery. She was on the point of stripping off the glittering robe when the Duke was announced. It was too late to change. She hurried into the boudoir to meet him, floating in like a roseate cloud. "How beautiful!" exclaimed the Duke admiringly. "You look like a bride. It must be some joyful cause which brought you back here so soon and made you send for me." "On the contrary, Duke, a bride of misfortune, a penitent who would fain varnish the ugliness of her guilt in her friend's eyes by outward beauty." "Hum! That would be at any rate a useless deed, Madeline, for beautiful as you are, I do not love you for your beauty's sake, nor is it for your virtues. You never aspired to be a saint, not even in Amagor where you least succeeded. What I love is the whole grand woman, with all her faults, who seems to have been created for me, in spite of the obstacles reared between us by temperament and circumstances. The latter are accidents which may prevent our union, but which cannot deprive me of my share in you, the part which I alone understand, and which I shall love when I see you before me as a white-haired matron, weary of life. Perhaps then for the first time." Emotion stifled the Countess's words. She drew him down upon a chair by her side and sank feebly upon the cushions of her divan. "Oh, how cold your hands are," said the Duke, gazing with loving anxiety into her eyes. "You alarm me. Spite of your rosy glimmer, you are pale as your own pearls." "And now pearls in your eyes too, Madeline. My poor tortured Madeline. What has happened? Oh, Duke, help, advise me, or all is lost. The Wildenau's have discovered my secret. Josepha, that half-crazy girl from Amagor, has betrayed me. So that is her gratitude for the life you saved?" The Duke nodded, as if by no means surprised. "It was to be expected from that sort of person. Why did you preserve the fool?" "I could not let her leap into the water. Perhaps it would have been better." This sham saint had not even sufficient healthful nature in her to be grateful. Ah, she had reason to hate me. She loved my child more than any earthly thing, and reproached me for having neglected it. These people can imagine love only in the fulfillment of lowly duties and physical attendance. That a woman can have no time or understanding of these things, and yet love, is beyond their comprehension. A fine state of affairs, where the servant makes herself the judge of her mistress, nay, even discovers in her conduct an excuse for the basest treachery. A plain maidservant, properly reared by her parents, would have fulfilled her duty to her employers without philosophizing. The Countess nodded. She was thinking of old Martin. But, the Duke continued, extra allowance must of course be made for these Emergor people. We will let her rest. She is dead. Who knows how it happened, or the struggles through which she passed? Is she dead? Yes, she died just after the child. Indeed? Said the Duke thoughtfully, in a gentler tone. Well, then at least she has atoned. But, my dear Madeline, this does not undo the disaster. The Wildenhouse will at any rate try to make capital out of their knowledge of your secret, and, as the dear cousins are constantly incurring gaming and other debts, especially your red-haired kinsman Fritz, they will not let slip the opportunity of making their honoured cousin pay for their discretion the full amount of their notes. Ah, if that were all. That all. What more could there be? I admit that it is unspeakably painful for you to know that your honour and your deepest secrets are in such hands. But how long will it be ere, if it please God, you will be in a position which will remove you from it all, and I— Duke, good heavens, it is far worse, cried the Countess, wringing her hands. Oh, merciful God, at last it must be told. You do not know all, the worst. I had not courage to tell you. Are you aware of the purport of my late husband's will? Certainly. It runs that you must restore the property, of which he makes you sole heiress, to the cousins if you marry again. What of that? Do you suppose I ever thought of your millions? He laughed gaily. I flatter myself that my finances will not permit you to feel the withdrawal of your present income when you are my wife. Omnipotent Father, you do not understand me. This is the moment I have always dreaded. Oh, had I only been truthful. Duke, forgive me, pity me. I am the most miserable creature under the sun. I shall not be your wife, but a beggar, for I am married, and the Wildenhouse know it through Josepha. There are moments when it seems as if the whole world was silent, as if the stars paused in their courses to listen, and we hear nothing save the pulsing of the blood in our ears. It is long ere we perceive any other sound. This was the case with the Duke. For a long time he seemed to himself both deaf and blind. Then he heard the low hissing of the gas jets, then heavy breathing, and at last the earth began to turn on its axis again, and things resumed their natural relations. Yet his energetic nature did not need much time to recover its poise. One glance at the hopeless drooping woman showed him that this was not the hour to think of himself, that he never had more serious duties to perform than today. Now he perceived for the first time that he had unconsciously retreated from her half the length of the room. She held out her hand imploringly, and with the swiftness of thought he was once more at her side, clasping it in his own. I have concealed this, deceived your great noble love, for years, because I perceived that you were as necessary to my life as reason and science and all the other gifts I once undervalued. I did not venture to reveal the secret, lest I should lose you. The moment has come. You will leave me, for you must now make another choice, but do not be angry, grant me the one consolation of parting without rancour. We have not yet gone so far. I told you 10 minutes ago that the accidents of temperament and circumstance may divide us, but cannot rob you of what was created for me. We do not part so quickly. You have not deceived me, for you have never told me that you loved me or would become my wife, and your bearing was blameless. Your husband might have witnessed every moment of our intercourse. Believe me, the slightest coquetry, the smallest concession in my favour at your husband's expense would find in me the sternest possible judge. But though an unhappy wife, you were a loyal one. To that I can bear witness. If I yielded to illusions, it is no fault of yours. Who can expect a nature so delicately strung as yours to make an executioner of the heart of her best friend? Those are violent measures which would not accord with the sweet weakness which renders you at once so guilty and so excusable. The Countess hid her face as if overwhelmed by remorse and shame. Do not let us lose our composure and trust to me to care for you still, for your present position requires the utmost caution and prudence. But now, Madeline, you have no further pretext for not telling me the whole truth. Now I must know all to be able to act. Will you answer my questions? Yes. Then tell me, are you really married to Freya? Yes. So the farce must end tragically, murmured the Duke. I cannot, will not believe it. It is too shocking that a woman like you should be ruined by the Amigor farce. Not by that, by the presumption with which I sought to draw the deity down to me. Oh, it is a hard punishment. I prayed so fervently to God, and, instead of his face, he showed me a mask and then left me to atone for the deception by the repentance of a whole life. Ah, can you really believe that the highest wisdom would have played so cruel a masquerade with you? Why should you be so terribly punished? No, ma chère amie, God has neither deceived nor wished to punish you. He showed himself in response to your longing, or rather your longing made you imagine that you saw him. And had you been content with that, you would have returned home happy with the vision of your God in your heart, like thousands who were elevated by the Passion Play. But you wanted more. You possess a sensuous religious nature which cannot separate the essence from the appearance, and, after having seen, you desired to possess him in the precise form in which he appeared to you. Had it depended upon you, you would have robbed the world of its God. Fortunately, it was only Herr Freya whom you stole, and now that you perceive your error, you accuse God of having deceived you. You talk constantly of your faith in God, and yet have so poor an opinion of him. What had God to do with your imagining that the poor actor in the Passion Play, who wore his mask, must be himself, and therefore wedded him? The Countess made no reply. This was the tone which she could never endure. He was everything to her, her sole confidant and counsellor. But he could not comprehend what she had experienced during the Passion Play. I am once more the dry sceptic who so often angered you, am I not? Said the Prince, whose keen observation let nothing escape. But I flatter myself that you will be more ready to view matters from a sober standpoint after having convinced yourself of the dangers of intercourse with phantoms and demigods who lure their victims into devious paths where they are liable morally to break their necks. The Countess could not help smiling sorrowfully. You are incorrigible. Well, we must take things as they are. As you will not confess that you, pardon the frankness, have committed a folly and ruined your life for the sake of a fanciful whim, the caprice must be elevated to the rank of a dispensation of Providence, and the inactive endurance of its consequences, a meritorious martyrdom. But I do not believe that God is guilty either of your marriage or of your self-constituted martyrdom, and therefore I tell you that I do not regard your marriage, to use the common parlance, one of those made in heaven, in other words, an indissoluble one. The Countess shrank as though her inmost thoughts were suddenly pointing treacherous fingers at her. Do you take it so lightly, Duke? That I do not take it lightly is proved by the immense digression which I made to remove any moral and religious scruples. The practical side of the question scarcely requires discussion. But to settle the religious moral one first, tell me, was your marriage a civil or religious one? Religious? When and where? At Prankenberg, after the Passion Play. It will be 10 years next August. How did it all happen? Very simply, my father, who suddenly sought me, as usual when he was in debt, saw that I wanted to marry Freya, and, fearing a public scandal, advised me, in order to save the property, which he needed almost more than I, to marry secretly. Wherever the Tridentine Council ruled, the sole requisite of a valid marriage was that the two persons should state, in the presence of an ordained priest and 2 witnesses, that they intended to marry. As my father was never very reliable and might change his opinion any day, I hastened to follow his advice before it occurred to him to put any obstacles in my way, as the pastor at Prankenberg was wholly in his power. So I set off with Freya and Josepha that very night. An old coachman, Martin, whose fidelity I had known from childhood, lived at Prankenberg. I took him and Josepha for witnesses, and we surprised the old pastor while he was drinking his coffee. The Prince made a gesture of surprise. What? Over his coffee? Yes, before he could push back his cup, we had made our statement, and the deed was done. The Prince started up, his eyes sparkled, his whole manner betrayed the utmost agitation. And you call that being married? And give me this fright? He drew a long breath, as if relieved of a burden. Madeleine, if you had only told me this at once. But why? Does it change the matter? Surely you will not persuade yourself that this farce with the old pastor in his dressing gown and slippers, his morning pipe and the fragrance of mocha, was a wedding. You will not expect me as a Protestant or any enlightened Catholic to regard it in that light. But what does the form matter? Protestantism cares nothing for the form, it heeds only the meaning. But the meaning was lacking, at least to you, To you it was a mere form which you owed to the sanctity of your lover's mask of Christus. He seized her hand with unwonted passion. Madeleine, for once be truthful to yourself and to me. Am I not right? Yes, she murmured almost inaudibly. Well then, if the meaning was lacking and the chosen form an illegal one, what binds you? Madeleine was silent. This question was connected with her secret, which he would never understand. His nature was too positive to reckon with anything except facts. The Duke felt that she was withholding an answer, not because she had none, but because she did not wish to give the true one. But he did not allow himself to be disconcerted. Did the old pastor give you any written proof of this sacred right? We will give it the proud name of a marriage certificate. Yes. Who has the document? Freya. That is unfortunate, for it gives him an apparent right to consider himself married and make difficulties which complicate the case. But we can settle with Freya. I have less fear of him. Your situation is more imperiled by this tale of a secret marriage, which Josepha, in good faith, brought to the ears of the Wildenhaus. This is a disaster which requires speedy remedy. In other respects, everything is precisely as it was when you went to Cannes. This complication changes nothing in my opinion. I hold the same view. If you no longer love Freya, break with him. The way of doing so is a minor matter. I leave it to you. But break with him and give me your hand. Then the whole spectre will melt. We will gladly restore the Wildenau property to the cousins, and they will then have no farther motive for pursuing the affair. Is that true? Could you still think seriously of it? And I, good heavens, must I become doubly a criminal? But, cher ami, look at things objectively a little. Even if I do look at them objectively, I don't understand how I could marry again without being divorced, and to apply for a divorce now would be acknowledging the marriage. Who is to divorce you, if no one married you? According to civil law, you are still single, for you are not registered in accordance with your rank. According to religious law, you are not married, at least not in the opinion of the great majority of Christian countries and sects to whom the Tridentine Council is not authoritative. Will you insist upon sacrificing your existence and honour to a sentimental scruple? Will you confess to the Wildenhaus that you are married? In that case, you must not only restore the property, but also the interest you have illegally appropriated for 9 years, which will swallow your little private property and rob you of your sole means of support. What will follow then? Do you mean to retire with the steward from the scene amid the jeering laughter of society, make soup for him at his home in Amagor, live by the labour of his hands, and at Christmas receive the gift of a calico gown? The Countess shuddered, as though shaken by a feverish chill. Or will you continue to live on with Freya as before and suffer the cousins to begin an inquiry against you and afford the world the spectacle of seeing you wrangle with them over the property? Then you must produce the dogmatic and legal proof that you are not married. This certainly would not be difficult, but I must beg you to note certain possibilities. If it is decided that your marriage was illegal, then the question will be brought forward, how did you yourself regard it? And it might occur to the Wildenhaus's lawyers that, no matter whether correctly or not, you considered yourself married and intentionally defrauded them of the property. Merciful heaven! Or will you then escape a criminal procedure by declaring that you regarded your connection with Freya as an illegal marriage? Oh! The Countess crimsoned with shame. There the vindication would be more dishonouring than the accusation, so you must renounce that. You see that you have been betrayed into a circulus vitiosus from which you can no longer escape. Wherever you turn, you have but the choice between poverty or disgrace, unless you decide to become Duchess of Metten, Barnheim, and thus, at one bound, spring from the muddy waves which now threaten you into the pure, unapproachable sphere of power and dignity to which you belong. My arms are always open to save you, my heart is ready to love and to protect you. Can you still hesitate? The tortured woman threw herself at his feet. Duke, Emile, save me. I am yours. Chapter 28. Parting. Several minutes have passed. To the Duke, a world of happiness. To the Countess, of misery. The Duke bent over the beautiful trembling form to clasp her in his arms for the first time. Have I won you at last, my long-sought love? He exclaimed rapturously. Do you now perceive what your dispensations of Providence mean? The shrewdness and persistence of a single man, who knows what he wants, has baffled them and driven all the heroes of signs and wonders from the field. Do you now believe what I said just now, that we are our own Providence? That will appear in due time. Do not exalt yourself and do not blaspheme. God might punish your arrogance. she said faintly, slipping gently from his embrace. Madeline, no betrothal kiss after these weary years of waiting and hoping. I am still Freya's wife, she said evasively, not until I am parted from him. You are right. I will not steal my bride's first kiss from another. I thank you for honouring my future right in his. His lips touched her brow with a calm, friendly caress. Then he rose. It is time to go. I have not a moment to lose. He glanced at the clock. 7. I will make my preparations at once and set out for Frankenberg tomorrow. What do you wish to do? First of all, to see what is recorded in the church register, and to ascertain what kind of a man the Catholic pastor is, that I may form some idea of what the wild nous have discovered and how much proof they have obtained. Then we can judge how far we must dissimulate with these gentlemen, until your relation with Freya can be dissolved without any violent outbreak, or without being compelled to use any undue haste. I will also go to Barnheim and quietly prepare everything there for our marriage. The more quickly all these business matters are settled, the sooner our betrothal can be announced. And that I am ardently longing to be at last permitted to call you mine, you will, I hope, understand. But my relation with Freya must first be arranged, said the Countess evasively. We cannot dispose of him like an ordinary business matter. He is a man of heart and mind. We must remember that I could not be happy for an hour if I knew that he was miserable. Yet you have left him alone for weeks and months without any pangs of conscience, said the Duke with a shade of sternness. It was not I, but the force of circumstances. What happens now I shall do, and must bear the responsibility. Help me to provide that it is not too heavy. Her face wore a lofty, beautiful expression as she spoke, and deeply moved, he raised her hand to his lips. Certainly, Madeline. We will show him every consideration and do everything as forbearingly as possible. But remember that, as I just respected his rights, you must now guard mine, and that every hour in which you retain this relation to him longer than necessary is treason to both. It cannot suit your taste to play such a part, so do not lose a moment in renouncing it. Certainly, you are right. Will you be strong, will you have the power to do what is unavoidable, and do it soon? I have always been able to do what I desired. I can do this also. The Duke took her hand and gazed long and earnestly into her eyes. Madeline, I do not ask, do you love me? I ask only, do you believe that you will love me? The profound modesty of this question touched her heart with indescribable melancholy, and in overflowing gratitude for such great love, which gave all and asked nothing, she bowed her head. Yes, I do believe it. The Duke's usual readiness of speech deserted him. He had no words to express the happiness of this moment. What was that? Voices in the anteroom. The noise sounded like a dispute. Then someone knocked violently at the door. "Come in!" cried the Countess, with a strange thrill of fear. The footman entered hurriedly with an excited face. "A gentleman, he calls himself Steward Freya, is following close at my heels. He would not be refused admittance." He pointed backward to where Freya already appeared. The Countess seemed turned to stone. "Request the steward to wait a moment," she said at last, with the imperiousness of the mistress. The man stepped back, and they saw him close the door almost by force. "Do not carry matters too far," said the Duke. "He seems to be very much excited. Such people should not be irritated. Admit him before he forces the door and makes a scandal in the presence of the servant. He comes just at the right time. In this mood, it will be easy for you to dismiss him. So end the matter. But be calm, have no scene. Shall I remain at hand? No, I am not afraid. It would be ignoble to permit you to listen to him. Trust me, and leave me to my fate." At this time, the voices again grew louder, then the door was violently thrown open. Freya stood within the room. "What does this mean? Am I assaulted in my own house?" cried the Countess, rebelling against this act of violence. Freya stood trembling from head to foot. They could hear his teeth chatter. "I merely wished to ask whether it was the Countess Wildenau's desire that I should be insulted by her servant." "Certainly not," replied the Countess with dignity. "If my servant insulted you, you shall have satisfaction. Only I wish you had asked it in a less unseemly way." The Duke quietly took his hat and kissed the Countess' hand. "Restez calm." Then he passed out, saluting Freya with that aristocratic courtesy which at once irritates and disarms. Freya stepped close to the Countess. His eyes wandered restlessly. His whole appearance was startling. Everything in the world has its limit, even patience. Mine is exhausted. Tell me, are you my wife? You who stand here in this gay masquerade of laces and pearls, are you the mourning mother of a dead child? Is this my wife, who decks herself for another, shuts herself up with another, or at least gives orders not to be disturbed, who has her lackeys keep her wedded husband at bay outside with blows, and deems it unseemly if the last remnant of manly dignity in his soul rebels and he demands satisfaction from his wife? Where is the man, I ask, who would not be frenzied? Where is the woman, I ask, who once loved me? Is it you who desert, betray, make me contemptible to myself and others? Where, in the wide world is there a man so deceived, so trampled underfoot, as I am by you? Have you any answer to this, woman? The Countess turned deadly pale. Terror almost stifled her. For the first time she beheld the Gorgon, popular fury, in his face, and while turning to stone the thought came to her, would you live with that? Horror stole over her. She did not know whether her feeling was fear or loathing. She only knew that she must fly from the turbid waves ever rolling nearer. There is no armour more impenetrable than the coldness of a dead feeling. Madeleine von Wildenau armed herself with it. Tell me, if you please, how you came here, what you desire, and what put you into such excitement. What, merciful heaven, do you still ask? I came here to learn where you were now, to what address I could write, as you made no reply to my announcement of Josepha's death, and I wished to say that I could no longer endure this life. While talking with the servant at the door, old Martin passed and told me that you were here. I wanted to say one last word to you. I went upstairs, found the footman, and entreated him to announce me, or at least to inquire when I could speak to you. You had a visitor, and could not be disturbed, was his scornful answer. Then the consciousness of my just rights awoke within me, and I commanded him to announce me. You refused to receive me. I must wait in the ante-room while you, as I saw through the half-open door, were whispering familiarly with your former suitor. Then I forgot everything and approached the door. The servant tried to prevent me. I flung him aside, and then he dealt me a blow in the face, that face which you had once likened to the countenance of your God. He, your servant. If I had not had sufficient self-control at the moment to say to myself that the lackey was only your tool, I should have torn him to pieces with my own hands, as I should now tear you if you were not a woman and sacred to me, even in your sin. I sincerely regret what has happened and do not blame you for making me, at least indirectly, responsible. I will dismiss the servant, of course, although he has the excuse that you provoked him and that he did not know you. Yes, he certainly cannot know me, when I am never permitted to appear. No matter, he should not venture to treat even a stranger so, and therefore must be punished with dismissal. Because he should not venture to treat even a stranger so? Freya laughed sadly, bitterly. I thank you, keep your servant. I will renounce this satisfaction. I do not know what else you desire. You do not know. Oh heaven, had this happened earlier, what would your feelings have been? Do you remember your emotion in the Passion Play, when I received only the semblance of a blow upon the cheek? Did it not, as you said, strike your own heart? How should you feel when you saw it in reality? Oh, tears should have streamed down your cheeks with grief for the poor deserted husband, who the only time he crossed your threshold was insulted by your lackey. If you still retained one spark of love for me, you would feel that a single kiss pressed compassionately on my cheek to efface the brand would be a greater satisfaction than the dismissal of a servant whom you would have sacrificed to any stranger. But that is over. We no longer understand each other. The Countess struggled a moment between pity and repugnance, but at the thought of pressing her lips to the face her servant's hand had struck, loathing overwhelmed her, and she turned away. Yes, turn your back upon me, for should you look me in the eyes now, you would be forced to lower your own and blush with shame. I beg you to consider that I am not accustomed to such outbreaks, and shall be compelled to close the conversation, if your manner does not assume a form more in accord with the standard of my circle. Yes, I understand. You dread the element you have unchained. A peasant was very well, by way of variety, was he not? He loved differently, more ardently, more fiercely than your smooth city gentleman. The strength and the impetuosity of the untutored man were not too rude when I bore you through the flaming forest and caught the falling branches which threatened to crush you. Then you did not fear me. You did not thrust me back within the limits of your social forms. On the contrary, you rejoiced that the world still contained power and might, and felt yourself a Titaness. Why have you suddenly become so weak-nerved and cannot endure this might because it has turned against you? "No," said the Countess, with a flash of deadly hatred in her fathomless grey eyes, "not on that account, but because at that time I believed you to be different from what you really are. Then I believed I beheld a god, now I perceive that it was a—" She paused. "Go on. Put no constraint on yourself. Now you perceive that it was a peasant. You just called yourself by that name." Freya stood as though a thunderbolt had struck him. He seemed to be struggling for breath. "Yes," he said at last in a low tone, "I did call myself by that name, but you should not have done so. Not you." He grasped the back of a chair to steady himself. "It is your own fault," said the Countess coldly. "But will you not sit down? We have only a few words to say to each other. You have in this moment stripped off the mask of Christus and torn the last illusion from my heart. I can no longer see in the person who stood before me so disfigured by fury the image of the Redeemer. Was not the Christ also angry when he saw the money changers in the temple? And you bartered the most sacred treasures of your heart and mind for paltry pelf and useless baubles. But I must not be angry. Scarcely a year ago, by the bedside of our sick child, you reproached me with being unable to cease playing the Christ. Now I have not kept up the part. But it does not matter. Whatever I might be, I should no longer please you, for the love which rendered the peasant a god is lacking. Yet one thing I must add, if now, after 9 years' marriage with you, I am still rough and a peasant, the reproach does not fall on me alone. You might have raised, ennobled me, my soul was in your keeping." Tears suddenly filled his eyes. "Woman, what have you done with my soul?" He sank into a chair, his strength was exhausted. Madeleine von Wildnau made no reply. The reproach struck home. She had never taken the trouble to develop his powers, to expand his intellectual faculties. After his poetical charm was exhausted, she flung him aside like a book whose contents she had read. "You knew my history. I had told you that I grew up in the meadow with the horses, and had gained the little I knew by my own longing. I would have been deeply grateful if you had released me from the ban of ignorance and quenched the yearning which those who are half-educated always feel for the treasures of culture, of which they know a little, just enough to show them what they lack. But whenever I sought to discuss such subjects with you, you impatiently made me feel my shortcomings, and this shamed and intimidated me. So I constantly deteriorated in my lonely life, grew more savage instead of more cultivated. Do you know what is the hardest punishment which can be inflicted upon criminals? Solitary confinement. It can be imposed for a short time only, because they go mad. Since the child and Joseph had died, I have been one of those unfortunates, and you did not even write me a line, had no word for me. I felt that my mind was gradually becoming darkened. Woman, even if you had power over life and death, you must not murder my soul, you have no right to that. Even the law slays the body only, not the soul. And where it imposes the death penalty, it provides that the torture shall be shortened as much as possible. You are more cruel than the law, for you destroy your victim slowly, intellectually and physically." "Terrible," murmured the Countess. "Ay, it is terrible. You worldlings come and entice and sigh and kiss the hem of our robes, as long as the delusion of your excited imagination lasts, and your delusion infects us till we at last believe ourselves that we are gods, and then you thrust us headlong into the depths. Here you strew the miasma of the mania for greatness and vanity, yonder money and the seeds of avarice. There again you wish to sow your culture, tear us from our ignorance, and but half complete your work. Then you wonder because we become misshapen, sham, artificial creatures, comedians, speculators, misunderstood geniuses, everything in the world except true children of Amago." He wiped his forehead, as if it were bleeding from the scratches of thorns. "I was a type of my people when, still a simple shepherd boy, I was brought from my herd to act the Christ, when in timid amazement I suddenly felt stirring within me powers of which I had never dreamed. And I am so once more in my wretchedness, my mental conflicts, my marred life. I shall be so at last in my defeat or victory, as God is gracious to me. And since everything has deserted me, since I saw Josepha, the last thing left me of Amago, lying in her coffin, since then it has seemed as if from her grave, and that of all my happiness, my home, my betrayed, abandoned home, once more rose before me, and I felt a strange yearning for the soil to which I have a right, the earth where I belong. Ah, only when the outside world abandons us do we know what home is. Unfortunately, I forgot it long enough, while I believed that you loved and needed me. Now that I know that you no longer care for me, the matter is very different." Like a true peasant, I believed that I had only duties, no rights. But in my loneliness I have pondered over many things, and so at last perceived that you, too, had duties, and expected more from me than I can honourably endure. That I bore it so long gave you a right to despise me, for the husband who sits angrily in a corner and sees his wife daily betray, deny, and mock him, deserves no better fate. So I have come to ask what you intend and to tell you my resolve. What do you desire? That you will go with me to Amergau, that you will cast aside the wealth, distinction, and splendour which I was not permitted to share with you, and in exchange accept with me my scanty earnings, my simplicity, my honest plebeian name. For, poor and humble as I am not so contemptible in the eyes of him, who bestowed upon me the dignity and honour of personating his divine Son, that you need feel ashamed to be my wife in the true Christian meaning. The Countess uttered a sigh of relief. You anticipate me, she answered, blushing. I see that you feel the untenableness of our relation. Your ultimatum is a proof that you will have strength to do what is inevitable, and I have delayed so long only from consideration for you. For, you know as well as I that I could never assent to your demand. It will be a sacred duty, so long as you live, to see that you want for nothing. But we must part. Freya turned pale. Part? We must part, forever. Yes. Merciful heaven, is nothing sacred to you, not even the bond of marriage? You know that I am a rationalist, and do not believe in dogmas. As such I hold that every marriage can be dissolved whenever the moral conditions under which it was formed prove false. Unfortunately, this is the case with us. You did not learn to accommodate yourself to the circumstances, and you never will. The conflict has increased till it is unendurable. We cannot understand each other, so our marriage bond is spiritually sundered. Why should we maintain its outward semblance? I have lost through you 9 years of my life, sacrificed to you the duties imposed by my rank, by renouncing marriage with a man of equal station. Matters have now progressed so far that I shall be ruined if you do not release me. Will you nevertheless cross my path and thrust yourself into my sphere? Oh God, this too, cried Freya in the deepest anguish. When have I thrust myself into your sphere? How, where, have I crossed your path? During the whole period of my marriage I have lived alone on the solitary mountain peak as your servant. Have I boasted of my position as your husband? I waited patiently until every few weeks, and later, every few months you came to me. I disdained all the gifts of your lavish generosity. It was my pride to work for you in return for the morsel of food I ate. I asked nothing from your wealth, your position, took no heed, like others, of the splendour of your establishment. I wanted nothing from you save the immortal part. I was the poorest, the most insignificant of all your servants. My sole possession was your love, and that I was forced to conceal from every inquisitive eye, like a theft, in order to avoid the scorn of my fellow citizens and all who could not understand the relation in which I stood to you. But this disgrace also I bore in silence, when a word would have vindicated me. Bore it, that I might not drag you down from your brilliant position to mine, and you call that thrusting myself into your sphere. I will grant that I gradually became morose and embittered, and by my ill temper and reproaches deterred you more and more from coming. But I am only human, and was forced to bear things beyond human endurance. The intention was good, though the execution might have been faulty. I lost your love, I lost my child, I lost my faithful companion Josepha, yet I bore all in silence. I saw you revelling in the whirl of fashionable society, saw you admired by others and forget me, but I bore it, because I loved you 1,000 times better than myself and did not wish to cause you pain. I often thought of secretly vanishing from your life, like a shadow which did not belong there. But the inviolability of the marriage bond held me, and I wished to try once more, by the power of the vow you swore at the altar, to lead you back to your duty, for I cannot dissolve the sacrament which unites us, and which you voluntarily accepted with me. If it does not bind you, it still binds me. I am your husband, and shall remain so. If you break the bond, you must answer for it to God. As for me, I shall keep it unto death. That would be a needless sacrifice, which neither church nor state would require. I will not release myself and leave you bound. You argue from a mistaken belief that we were legally married. It is time to explain the error, both on your account and mine. You speak of a vow which I made you before the altar. Pray remember that we have never stood before one. Never? Muttered Freya, and the vein on his forehead swelled with anger. Was the breakfast table of the Frankenberg pastor an altar? No. But wherever two human beings stand before a priest in the name of God, there is a viewless altar. Those are subjective Catholic opinions which I do not understand. I do not consider myself married, and you need not do so either. Not married? Do you know what you are saying? What I must say to loose your bonds as well as mine. Good heavens, what will it avail if you loose my bonds, and at the same time cut an artery so that I bleed to death? No, no, you cannot be so cruel. You cannot be in earnest. O omnipotent Father, you did not say it. Take back the words. Lord, forgive her. She does not know what she is doing. Oh, take back those words. I will not believe that my wife, my dear wife, can be so wicked. Moderate your expressions. I guarantee my standpoint. Ask whom you choose. You will hear that we are not married. Freya rushed up to her and seized her by the shoulders, shaking her as a tempest shakes a young birch tree. Not married? Do you know then what you are? He waited vainly for an answer. He seemed fairly crazed. Shall I tell you? Shall I? Then for 9 years you were do not finish, shrieked the Countess, wrenching herself with a desperate effort from the terrible embrace and hurling him from her. Yes, I will finish, and you deserve that the whole world should hear and point the finger of scorn at you. I ought to shout to all the winds of heaven that the Countess Wildenau, who is too proud to be called a poor man's wife, was not too proud to be his. Traitor, ungrateful, dishonourable traitor. Is this your return for my love? Take a knife and thrust it into my heart. It would be more seemly than to threaten me with degradation. She drew herself up to her full height and raised her hand as if to take an oath. Accursed be the hour I raised you from the dust to my side. Curses on the false humanity which strove to efface the distinctions of rank. Curses on the murmur of the eternal rights of man which removes the fetters from brutishness, that it may set its foot upon the neck of culture. It is like the child which opens the door to the whining wolf to be torn to pieces by the brute. Yes, take yourself out of my life, gloomy shadow which I conjured from those seething depths in which ruin is wrought for us. Take yourself away, you have no longer any part in me. Your right is doubly, trebly forfeited, your spell is broken, your strength recoils from the shield of a noble spirit, under whose protection I stand. Dare to lay hands on me again, and you will insult the betrothed bride of the Duke of Barnheim and must account to him. A cry, a heavy fall. Freya lay senseless. The Countess timidly stroked the pallid face. A strange memory stole over her. Thus he lay prostrate on the ground when he was nailed to the cross. She could not help looking at him again and again. Oh, that all this should be a lie! Those features, that noble brow on which the majesty of suffering was throned, the very image of the Saviour. Yet only an image, a mask. She looked away. She would gaze no longer. She would not again fall a victim to the old delusion. She would not let herself be softened by the wonderful, delusive face. But what was she to do? If she called her servants, she would be the talk of the whole city on the morrow. She must aid him, try to restore him to consciousness alone. Yet if she now roused him from the merciful stupor, if the grief and rage which had overwhelmed him should break forth again, would he not murder her? Was it strange that she remained so calm in the presence of this thought? A contemptuous indifference to death had taken possession of her. If he kills me, he has a right to do so. She was too lofty to shun punishment which she had deserved, though it were her death. So she awaited her fate. And she brought a little bottle filled with a pungent essence from her sleeping room and poured a few drops into his mouth. It was long ere he gave any sign of life. It seemed as though the soul was reluctant to awake, as if it would not return to consciousness. At last he opened his eyes. They rested as coldly on the little trembling hand which was busied about him as if he had never clasped it, never kissed it, never pressed it to his throbbing heart. The storm had spent its fury. He was calm. The Countess had again been mistaken in him as usual. His conduct was always unlike her anticipations. He rose as quickly as his strength permitted, passed his hand over his disordered hair, and looked for his hat. I beg your pardon for having startled you. Forget this scene, which I might have spared you and myself, had I known what I do now. I deeply lament that the error which clouded your life has lasted so long. Yes, she said, and the words fell from her lips with the sharp sound of a diamond cutting glass. Yes, it was not worth it. Freya turned and gave her one last look. She felt it through her lowered lids. She had sunk on the sofa and fixed her eyes on the ground. A death-like chill ran through her limbs. She waited in her position as if paralyzed. All was still for a moment. Then she heard a light step cross the soft carpet of the room, and when she looked up, the door had closed behind Joseph Freyer. Chapter 29. INTHE Deserted House. The night had passed. Day was shining through the closed curtains, but Countess Wildenau still sat in the same spot where Freyer had left her. Yes, he had gone, silently, noiselessly as a shadow, perhaps vanished from her life, as he had said. She did not know what she felt. She would fain have relieved her stupor by tears, but she dared not weep. Why should she? Everything was proceeding exactly as she wished. True, she had been harsh, too severe and harsh, and words had been uttered by both which neither could forgive the other. Yet it was to be expected that the bond between them would not be sundered without a storm. Why was her heart so heavy, as if some misfortune had happened, greater than aught which could befall her? Tears. What would the Duke think? It would be an injustice to him. And it was not true that she felt anything. She had no emotion whatever, neither for the vanished man nor for the Duke. Honour. Honour was the only thing which could still be saved. But his sudden silence when she mentioned her betrothal to the Duke, his going thus, without a farewell, without a word. He despised her. She was no longer worthy of him. That was the cause of his sudden calmness. There was a crushing grandeur and dignity in this calmness after the outbursts of fierce despair. The latter expressed a conflict, the former a victory, and she was vanquished. Hers was the shame, the pangs of conscience, and a strange, inexplicable grief. So she sat pondering all night long, always imagining that she had seen what she had not witnessed, the last look he had fixed upon her, and then his noiseless walk through the room. It seemed as though time had stopped at that moment, and she was compelled, all through the night, to experience that one instant. Someone tapped lightly on the door, and the maid entered with a haggard face. "I only wanted to ask," she said, in a weary, faint tone, "whether I might go to bed a little while. I have waited all night long for your Highness to ring." "Why, have you been waiting for me?" said the Countess, rising slowly from the sofa. "I did not know it was so late. What time is it?" "Nearly 6 o'clock. But your Highness looks so pale. Will you not permit me to put you to bed?" "Yes, my good Nanny, take me to my bedroom. I cannot walk, my feet are numb." "You should lie down at once and try to get warm." "You are as cold as ice." And the maid, really alarmed by the helplessness of her usually haughty mistress, helped the drooping figure to her room. The Countess allowed herself to be undressed without resistance, sitting on the edge of the bed as if paralyzed, and waiting for the maid to lift her in. "I thank you," she said in a more gentle tone than the woman had ever heard from her lips, as the maid voluntarily rubbed the soles of her feet. Her head instantly sank upon the pillows, which bore a large embroidered monogram, surmounted by a coronet. When her feet at last grew warm, she seemed to fall asleep, and the maid left the room. But Madeleine von Wildenau was not asleep, she was merely exhausted, and while her body rested, she constantly beheld one image, felt one grief. The maid had determined not to rouse her mistress, and left her undisturbed. At last, late in the morning, the weary woman sank into an uneasy slumber, whence she did not wake until the sun was high in the heavens. When she opened her eyes, she felt as if she was paralyzed in every limb, but attributed this to the terrible impressions of the previous day, which would have shaken even the strongest nature. She rang the bell for the maid and rose. She walked slowly, it is true, and with great effort, but she did walk. After she had been dressed, and her breakfast was served, she wrote, "The footman Franz is dismissed for rude treatment of the steward Freyer, and is not to appear in my presence again. The intendant is to settle the matter of wages. Countess Wildenau." Another servant now brought in a letter on a silver tray. The Countess's hand trembled as she took it. The envelope was one of those commonly used by Freyer, but the writing was not his. "Is anyone waiting for an answer?" she asked in a hollow tone. "No, your Highness, it was brought by a grease woodcutter." The Countess opened the letter. It was from the maidservant at the hunting castle, and contained only the news that the steward had left suddenly, and the servants did not know what to do. The Countess sat motionless for a moment, unable to utter a word. Everything seemed whirling around her in a dizzy circle. She saw nothing save dimly, as if through a veil, the servant clearing away the breakfast. "Let old Martin put the horses in the carriage," she said hoarsely at last. How the minutes passed before she entered it. How it was possible for her to assume, in the presence of the maid, the quiet bearing of the mistress of the estate, who must see that things were going on right, she did not know. Now she sat with compressed lips, holding her breath that she might seem calm in her own eyes. What will she find on the height? 2 graves of the past, and the empty abode of a former happiness. She fancied that a dark wing brushed by the carriage window as if the death angel were flying by with the cup of wormwood of which Freya had once spoken. She had a horror of the deserted house, the spectres of solitude and grief which the vanished man might have left behind. When a house is dead, it must be closed by the last survivor, and this is always a sorrowful task. But if he himself has driven love forth, he will cross the deserted threshold with a lagging step, for the ghost of his own act will stare at him everywhere from the silent rooms. Evening had closed in, and the shadows of the mountain were already gathering around the house, from whose windows no loving eye greeted her. The carriage stopped. No one came to meet her. Everything was lifeless and deserted. Her heart sank as she alighted. "Martin, drive to the stable and see if you can find the maid-servant," said the Countess in a low tone, as if afraid of rousing some shape of horror. Martin did not utter a word. His good-natured face was unusually grave as he drove off around the house in the direction of the stables. The Countess stood alone before the locked door. The evening wind swept through the trees and shook the boughs of the pines. A few broken branches swayed and nodded like crippled arms. They were the ones from which Freya had taken the evergreen for the child's coffin. At that time they were stiff with ice. Now the sap, softened by the spring rain, was dripping from them. Did she understand what the boughs were trying to tell her? Were her cheeks wet by the rain or by tears? She did not know. She only felt unutterably deserted. She stood on the moss-grown steps, shut out from her own house, and no voice answered her call. A cross towered above the treetops. It was on the steeple of the old chapel where they both lay, Josepha and the child. A bird of prey soared aloft from it, and then vanished in the neighbouring grove to shield its plumage from the rain. It had its nest there. Now all was still again, as if dead. Only the cloud rising above the wood poured its contents on the spring earth. At last footsteps approached. It was the girl bringing the keys. "I beg the Countess' pardon. I did not expect your Highness so late. I was in the stable unlocking the door," she said. Then she handed her the bunch of keys. "This one with the label is the key of the steward's room. He made me promise not to give it to anybody except the Countess if she should come again." "Bring a light. It is growing dark," replied the Countess, entering the sitting room. "I hope your Highness will excuse it," said the girl. "Everything is still just as it was left after the funerals of Josepha and the child. Herr Freya wouldn't allow me to clear anything away." She left the room to get a lamp. There lay the dry pine branches. There stood the crucifix with the candles, which had burned low in their sockets. This for weeks had been his sole companionship. "Poor, forsaken one," cried a voice in the Countess's heart, and a shudder ran through her limbs as she saw on the sofa a black pall left from Josepha's funeral. It seemed as if it were Josepha herself lying there, as if the black form must rise at her entrance and approach threateningly. Horror seized her, and she hurried out to meet the girl who was coming with a light. The steward's room was 1 story higher, adjoining her own apartments. She went up the stairs with an uncertain tread, leaving the girl below. She needed no witness for what she expected to find there. She thrust the key into the lock with a trembling hand and opened the door. Sorrowful duty. Wherever she turned in this house of mourning, she was under the ban of her own guilt. Wherever she entered one of the empty rooms, it seemed as if whispering, wailing spirits separated and crept into the corners, to watch until the moment came when they could rush forth as an avenging army. At her entrance the movement was communicated through all the boards of the old floor, until it really seemed as if viewless feet were walking by her side. For a moment she stood still, holding her breath. She had never before noticed this effect of her own steps. She had never been here alone. Her sleeping room was beside her husband's. The door stood open. He must have been in there to bid farewell before going away. She moved hesitatingly a few steps forward and cast a timid glance within. The 2 beds, standing side by side, looked like 2 coffins. She felt as if she beheld her own corpse lying there, the corpse of the former Countess Wildenau, Freya's wife. The woman standing here now was a different person, and her murderess. Yet she grieved for her and still felt her griefs and her death struggle. She hastily closed and bolted the door, as if the dead woman within might come out and call her to an account. Then she turned her dragging steps toward Freya's writing desk, for that is always the tabernacle where a lonely soul conceals its secrets. And, there lay a large envelope bearing the address, to the Countess Wildenau. To be opened by her own hands! She placed the lamp on the table and sat down to read. She no longer dreaded the ghosts of her own acts. He was with her, and though he had raged yesterday in the madness of his anguish, he would protect her. As she opened the envelope, 2 papers fell into her hands, her marriage certificate and a paper in Freya's writing. The lamp burned unsteadily and smoked, or were her eyes dim? Now she no longer saw the mistakes in writing. Now she saw between the clumsy characters a noble, grieving soul which had gazed at her yesterday from a pair of dark eyes for the last time. Clasping her hands over the sheet, she leaned her head upon them like a penitent Magdalene upon the gospel. It was to her also a gospel of pain and love. It ran as follows: Countess, I bid you an affectionate farewell, and enclose the marriage certificate, that you may have no fear of my causing you any annoyance by it. Everything else which I owe to your kindness I restore, as I can make no farther use of it. I am sincerely sorry that you were disappointed in me. I told you that I was not he whom I personated, but a poor, plain man. But you would not believe it, and made the experiment with me. It was a great misfortune for both, for you can never be happy, on account of the sin you wish to commit against me. I will pray God to release you from me, in a way which will spare you from taking this heavy sin upon you. But I have still one act of penance to perform toward my home, to which I have been faithless, that it may still forgive me in this life. I hear that the Passion Play cannot be performed in Ammergau next summer, because there is no Christus. That would be terrible for our poor parish. I will try whether I can help them out of the difficulty if they will receive me and not repulse me as befits the renegade. Here the writing was blurred by tears. Only wait, for the welfare of your own soul, until the performances are over, and I have done my duty to the community. Then God will be merciful and open a way for us all. Your grateful Joseph Freya. Postscript, if it is possible, forgive me for all I did to offend you yesterday. In brief, untutored words, was depicted the martyrdom of a soul which had passed through the school of suffering to the utmost perfection. The most eloquent, polished description of his feelings would have had less power to touch the Countess's heart than these simple, trite expressions. She herself could not have explained why it was the helplessness of the uncultured man who had trusted to her generosity, which spoke from these lines with an unconscious reproach, which pierced deeper than any complaint. And she had no answer to this reproach, save the tears which now flowed constantly from her eyes. Laying her head upon the page, she wept, at last wept. She remained long in this attitude. A sorrowful peace surrounded her. Nothing stirred within or without. The spirits seemed reconciled by what they now beheld. The dead Countess Wildenau in the next room had risen noiselessly. She was no longer there. She was flying far, far beyond the mountains, seeking the lost husband, the poor, innocent husband, who had resigned for her sake all that constitutes human happiness and human dignity, anxious for one thing only, her deliverance from what, in his childlike view of religion, he could not fail to consider a heavy, unforgivable sin. She was flying through a broad portal in the air. It was the rainbow formed of the tears of love shed by sundered human hearts for thousands of years. Even so looked the rainbow, which had arched above her head when she stood on the peak with the royal son of the mountains, high above the embers of the forest, through which he had borne her, ruling the flames. They had spared him, but she had had no pity. They had crouched at his feet like fiery lions before their tamer, but the woman for whom he had fought trampled on him. Yet above them arched the rainbow, the symbol of peace and reconciliation, and under this she had made the oath which she now intended to break. The dead Countess Wildenau, however, saw the gleaming bough again, and was soaring through it to her husband, for she had no further knowledge of earthly things. She knew only the old, long-denied, all-conquering love. Suddenly the clock on the writing-table began to strike. The penitent dreamer started. It was striking 9. The clock was still going. He had wounded it. It was a gift from her. He had left all her gifts, he wrote. That would be terrible. Surely he had not gone without any means. The key of the writing-table was in the lock. She opened the drawer. There lay all his papers, books, the rest of the housekeeping money, and accounts, all in the most conscientious order, and beside them, oh, that she must see it, a little purse containing his savings and a savings-bank book, which she herself had once jestingly pressed upon him. The little book was wrapped in paper, on which was written, "To keep the graves of my dear ones in Countess Wildenau's chapel." Oh, you great noble heart, which I never understood, sobbed the guilty woman, restoring the little volume to its place. But she could not rest. She must search on and on. She must know whether he had left her as a beggar. Against the wall beside the writing table stood a costly old armoire, richly ornamented, which had seen many generations of the Frankenbergs come and pass away. Madeleine von Wildenau turned the lock with an effort. There hung all his clothing, just as he had received it from her, or purchased it with his own wages. Nothing was missing save the poor little coat, hat and cane, with which he had left Amagor with the owner of a fortune numbering millions. He had wandered forth again as poor as he had come. Sinking on her knees, she buried her face, overwhelmed with grief and shame, in her clasped hands. Freya, Freya, I did not want this, not this. Now the long-repressed grief which she had inflicted upon herself burst forth unrestrained. Here she could shriek it out, here no one heard her. Oh, that you should leave me thus, unreconciled, without a farewell, with an aching heart, not even protected from want, and I let you go without one kind word. I did not even return your last glance. Was it possible that I could do it? The old Frankenberg lion on the coat of arms on the armoire had doubtless seen many mourners scan the garments whose owners rested under the sod. But no one of all the women of that failing race had wept so bitterly over the contents of the armoire as this last of her name. The candle had burned low in the socket. A star glinting through the torn clouds shone through the uncurtained windows. Beyond the forest the first flashes of spring lightning darted to and fro. Madeleine von Wildenau rose and stood for a while in the middle of the room, pondering. What did she want here? She had nothing more to find in the empty house. The dead Countess Wildenau was once more sleeping in the adjoining room, and the living one no longer belonged to herself. Could it be true that she had thrust out the peaceful inmate of this house? Thrust him forever from the modest home she had established for him? Husband, father of my child, where are you? No answer. He was no longer hers. He had risen from the humiliation she inflicted upon him. He had stripped off the robe of servitude and gone forth, scorning her and all else. A poor but free man. She must return to the slavery of her own guilt and of prosaic existence, while he went farther and farther away, like a vanishing star. She felt that her strength was failing. She must go, or she would sink dying in this place of woe, alone without aid or care. She folded the marriage certificate and Freya's letter together, and without another glance around the room. The ghost of her awakened conscience was stirring again. She took the dying candle and hurried down. The steps again creaked behind her, as though someone was following her downstairs. She had ordered the carriage at 9. It must have been waiting a long time. Her foot faltered at the door of the sitting-room, but she passed on. It was impossible for her to enter it again. She called. But the maidservant had gone to her work in the stables. Nothing save her own trembling voice echoed back through the passages. She went out. The carriage was standing at the side of the house. The rain had ceased, the forest was slumbering, and all the creatures which animated it by day with it. The Countess locked the door. Now interweave your boughs and shut it in, she said to the briars and pines which stood closely around it. Spread out your branches and compass it with an impenetrable hedge that no one may find it. The sleeping beauty who slumbers here, nothing must ever rouse. Chapter 30. The Wishoe. High above the rushing Wildbach, where the stream bursts through the crumbling rocks and in its fierce rush sends heavy stones grinding over one another, a man lay on the damp cliff which trembled under the shock of the falling masses of water. The rough precipices, dripping with spray, pressed close about him, shutting him into the cool, moss-grown ravine through which no patch of blue sky was visible, no sunbeam stole. Here the wanderer, deceived in everything, lay resting on his way home. With his head propped on his hand, he gazed steadfastly down into the swirl of the foaming, misty, ceaseless rush of the falling water. On the rock before him lay a small memorandum book, in which he was slowly writing sorrowful words, just as they welled from his soul, slowly and sluggishly, as the resin oozes from the gashed trees. Wherever a human heart receives a deep, fatal wound, the poetry latent in the blood of the people streams from the hurt. All our sorrowful old folk songs are such drops of the heart's blood of the people. The son of a race of mountaineers who sung their griefs and joys was composing his own mournful wayfaring ballad, for not one of those which he knew and cherished in his memory expressed the unutterable grief he experienced. He did not know how he wrote it. He was ignorant of rhyme and metre. When he finished, that is, when he had said all he felt, it seemed as though the song had flown to him, as the seed of some plant is blown upon a barren cliff, takes root and grows there. But now, after he had created the form of the verses, he first realized the full extent of his misery. Hiding the little book in his pocket, he rose to follow the toilsome path he was seeking high among the mountains, where there were only a few scattered homesteads, and he met no human being. While Countess Wildenau in the deserted hunting castle was weeping over the cast-off garments with which she had flung aside the form of a servant, the free man was striding over the heights, fanned by the night breeze, lashed by the rain in his thin coat. Free, but also free to be exposed to grief, to the elements, to hunger. Free, but so free that he had not even a roof beneath which to shelter his head within 4 protecting walls. Both love and faith have fled for aye, like chaff by wild winds swept away. Naught is left me here below, save keen remorse and endless woe. No home have I on the wide earth. A ragged beggar fare I forth, in midnight gloom, by tempests met, broken my star has set. With raiment tattered by the sleet, my brains scorched by the sun's fierce heat, my heart torn by a human hand, a shadow, I glide through the land. Homeward I turn, white is my hair, of love and faith my life is bare. Whoe'er beholds me makes the sign of the cross, God save a fate like mine. So the melancholy melody echoed through the darkness of the night, from peak to peak along the road from the Grise to Emergor. And wherever it sounded, the birds flew startled from the trees deeper into the forest, the deer fled into the thickets and listened, the child in the cradle started and wept in its sleep. The dogs in the lonely courtyards barked loudly. That was no human voice, it was a shot deer or an owl, the peasants said to their trembling wives, listening for a time to the ghostly wailing notes dying faintly away till all was still once more, and the spectre had passed. But when morning dawned, and the time came when the matin bells drove all evil spirits away, the song, too, ceased, and only its prophecy came true. Whoever recognized in the emaciated man, with hollow eyes and cheeks, the Christus Frere of Amago, doubtless made the sign of the cross in terror, exclaiming, "Heaven preserve us!" But the lighter it grew, the farther he plunged into the forest. He was ashamed to be seen. His gait grew more and more feeble, his garments more shabby by his long walk in the rain and wind. He still had a few pennies in his pocket, the exact sum he possessed when he left Amagor. He was keeping them for a night's lodgings which he must take once during the 24 hours. He could have reached Amagor easily by noon, but he did not want to enter it in broad day as a ragged beggar. So he rested by day and walked at night. At a venerable old inn, the Shield, on the road from Steengaden to Amagor, he asked one of the servants if he might lie a few hours on the straw to rest. The latter hesitated before granting permission. The man looked so doubtful. At last he said, "Well, I won't refuse you, but see that you carry nothing off when you go away from here." Freya made no reply. The wrath which had made him hurl the lackey from the countess's door no longer surged within him. Now it was his home which was punishing him, speaking to him in her rude accents. Let her say what she would, he accepted it as a son receives a reproof from a mother. He hung his drenched coat to dry in the sun, which now shone warmly again, then slipped into the barn and lay down on the hay. A refreshing slumber embraced him. Poverty and humility took the sorrowing soul into their maternal arms, as a poor man picks up the withered blossom. The rich one has carelessly flung aside, and carrying it home makes it bloom again. Rest, weary soul. You no longer need to stretch and distort the noble proportions of your existence to fit them to relations to which they were not born. You need be nothing more than you are, a child of the people, suckled by the sacred breast of nature, and can always return there without being ashamed of it. Poverty and lowliness extend their protecting mantle over you, and hide you from the looks of scorn and contempt which rend your heart. A peaceful expression rested upon the sleeper's face, but his breathing was deep and laboured, as if some powerful feeling was stirring his soul under the quiet repose of slumber, and from beneath his closed lids stole a tear. During several hours the exhausted body lay between sleeping and waking, unconscious grief and comfort. Opposite, on the Wise, 15 minutes' walk from the Shield, a bell rang in the church where the pilgrims went. There an ancient Christ, our Lord of the Wise, called simply the Wyshell, carved from mouldering, painted wood, was hung from the cross by chains which rattled when the image was laughed at incredulously, and with real hair, which constantly grew again when an impious hand cut it. At times of special visitation it could sweat blood, and hundreds journeyed to the Wise, trustfully seeking the wonder-working Y-shell. It was a terrible image of suffering, and the first sight of the scourged body and visage contorted by pain caused an involuntary thrill of horror, increased by the black beard and long hair, such as often grows in the graves of the dead. The face stared fixedly at the beholder with its glassy eyes, as if to say, "Do you believe in me?" The emaciated body was so lifelike that it might have been an embalmed corpse placed erect. The horror vanished when one gazed for a while, for an expression of patience rested on the uncanny face. The lashes of the fixed eyes began to quiver. The image became instinct with life. The chains swayed slightly, and the drops of blood again grew liquid. Why should they not? The heart, which loves forever, can also, to the eye of faith, bleed forever. Hundreds of wax limbs and silver hearts, consecrated bones and other anomalies bore witness to past calamities where the Y-shell had lent its aid. But he could also be angry, as the rattling of his chains showed, and this gave him a somewhat spectral, demoniac aspect. Under the protection of this strange image of Christ, whose power extended over the whole mountain plateau, the living image of Christ lay unconscious. Then the vesper bells, ringing from the church, roused him. He hastily started up and, in doing so, struck against the block where the wood was split. A chain flung upon it fell. Freya raised and held it a moment before replacing it on the block, thinking of the scourging in the Passion Play. "Heavens, the Y-shell!" shrieked a terrified voice, and the door leading into the barn, which had been softly opened, was hurriedly shut. "Father! Father! Come quick! The Y-shell is in the barn!" screamed someone in deadly fright. "Silly girl," Freya heard a man say. "Are you crazy? What are you talking about?" "Really, father, on my soul, just go there." "The Y-shell is standing in the middle of the hay. I saw him, by our Lord and the Holy Cross. Amen." Freya heard the girl sink heavily on the bench by the stove. The father answered angrily, silly thing," and went to the door in his hobnailed shoes. "Is anyone in here?" he asked. But as Freya approached, the peasant himself almost started back in terror. "Good Lord, who are you? Why do you startle folks so?" "Can't you speak?" I asked the man if I might rest there, and then I fell asleep. "I don't see why you should be so lazy, turning night into day. Tramp on, and sleep off your drunkenness somewhere else. I want no miracles, and no Y-shell in my house." "I'll pay for everything," said Freya humbly, almost beseechingly, holding out his little stock of ready money, for he was overpowered with hunger and thirst. "And what do I care for your pennies?" growled the tavern-keeper angrily, closing the door. There stood the hapless man, in whom the girl's soul had recognized with awe the martyred Christ, but whom the rude peasant turned from his door as a vagrant, hungry and thirsty, worn almost unto death, and with a walk of 5 hours before him. He took his hat and his staff, hung his dry coat over his shoulder, and left the barn. As he went out, he heard the last notes of the vesper bell, and felt a yearning to go to him for whom he had been mistaken. It seemed as if he were calling in the echoing bells. "Come to me, I have comfort for you." He struck into the forest path that led to the Y-shell. The white walls of the church soon appeared, and he stepped within, where the showy, antiquated style of the last century mingled with the crude notions of the mountaineers for and by whom it was built. Skulls, skeletons of saints, chubby-cheeked cupids, cruel martyrdoms, and Arcadian shepherdesses, nude penitents and fiends dragging them down into the depths, lambs of heaven and dogs of hell were all in motley confusion. Above the chaotic medley arched on fantastic columns, the huge dome with a gate of heaven painted in perspective, which, according to the beholder's standpoint, rose or sank, was foreshortened or the opposite. A wreath of lucernes beautifully ornamented, through which the blue sky peeped and swallows building their nests flew in and out, formed, as it were, the jewel in the architecture of the cornice. Even the eye of God was not lacking, a tarnished bit of mirror inserted above the pulpit in the centre of golden rays, and intended to flash when the sun shone on it. And there in a glass shrine, directly beneath all the tinsel rubbish, on the gilded carving of the high altar, the poor, plain little Y-shell hung in chains. The two, the wooden image of God and the one of flesh and blood, confronted each other. The Christ of the Amagor play greeted the Christ of the wise. It is true, they did resemble each other, like suffering and pain. Freya knelt long before the Y-shell, and what they confided to each other was heard only by the God in whose service and by whose power they wrought miracles, each in his own way. "You are happy," said the Y-shell, "happier than I. Human hands created and faith animated me. Where that is lacking, I am a mere dead wooden puppet, only fit to be flung into the fire. But you are created by God, you live and breathe, can move and act, and highest of all, suffer like him whom we represent. I envy you." "Yes," cried Freya, "you are right. To suffer like Christ is highest of all." "My God, I thank thee that I suffer." This was the comfort the Wyshell had for his sorely tried brother. It was a simple thought, but it gave him strength to bear everything. It is always believed that a great grief requires a great consolation. This is not true. The poorer the man is, the more value the smallest gift has for him, and the more wretched he is, the smallest comfort. To the husbandman whose crops have been destroyed by hail, it would be no comfort to receive the gift of a blossom, which would bring rapture to the sultry attic chamber of a sick man. In a great misfortune we often ask, what gave the person strength to endure it? It was nothing save these trivial comforts which only the unhappy know. The soul lamenting the loss of a loved one while many others are left is not comforted when the lifeless figure of a martyr preaches patience. But to the desolate one, who no longer has aught which speaks to him, the lifeless wooden image becomes a friend and its mute language a consolation. Beside the altar stood an alms box. The gifts for which it was intended were meant for repairs on the church and the preservation of the Wyshell, who sometimes needed a new cloth about his loins. Freya flung into it the few coins which the innkeeper had disdained, because he looked like the Wyshell, now they should go to him. He felt as if he should need no more money all his life, as if the comfort he had here received raised him far above earthly need and care. Twilight was gathering, the sun had sunk behind the blue peaks of the Pruntner Mountains, and now the hour struck. The sacred hour of the return home. Already he felt with joy the throbbing of the pulses of his home, a mysterious connection between this place and distant Amago. And he was right, childish as was the representation of the divine ideal. It was, nevertheless, the rippling of one of those hidden springs of faith which blend in the Passion Play, forming the great stream of belief which is to supply a thirsting world. As on a barren height, amid tangled thickets, we often greet with delight the low murmur of a hidden brook, which in the valley below becomes the mighty artery of our native soil, so the returning wanderer hurried on longingly toward the mysterious spring which led him to the mother's heart. But his knees trembled. Human nature asserted its rights. He must eat, or he would fall fainting. But where could food be had? The last pennies were in the alms box. He could not have taken them out again, even had he wished it. There was no way save to ask someone for bread. He dragged himself wearily to the parsonage. He would try there. The priest would be less startled by the Wyshell than the peasant. Thrice he attempted to pull the bell, but very gently. He fancied the whole world could hear that he was ringing, to beg. Yet, if it did not sound, no one would open the door. At last, with as much effort as though he was pulling the bell rope in the church steeple, he rang. The bell echoed shrilly. The pastor's old cook appeared. Freya raised his hat. "Might I ask you for a piece of bread?" he murmured softly, and the tall figure seemed to droop lower with every word. A cook, who was never allowed to turn a beggar from the door, eyed him a moment with mingled pity and anxiety. "Directly," she answered, and went in search of something, but prudently closed the door, leaving him outside as we do with suspicious individuals. Freya waited, hat in hand. The evening breeze swept chill across the lofty mountain plateau and blew his hair around his uncovered head. At last the cook came, bringing him some soup and a bit of bread. Freya thanked her and ate it. When he had finished, he gave the little dish back to the woman. But his hand trembled so that he almost let it fall, and his brow was damp. Then he thanked her again, but without raising his eyes, and quietly pursued his way. Chapter 31. Return home. The Wise towered like an island from amid a grey sea of clouds. All the mountains of Trauschgau and Prunt, Olgau and Tyrol, which surround it like distant shores and cliffs, had vanished in the mist. The windows in the comfortable tavern were lighted, and a fire was blazing on the hearth. One little lamp after another shone from the quiet farmhouses. The lonely church now lay silent. Silent, too, was the Wyshell in his glass shrine, while the wayfarer pressed steadily down through the mist toward home and the cross. Freya moved on more and more swiftly across the hillsides and through the woods till he reached the path leading down the mountain to the Halbammer, which flowed at its base. Gradually he emerged from the strata of mist, and now a faint ray of moonlight fell upon his path. Hour after hour he pursued his way. One after another, the lights in the houses were extinguished, the world sank into slumber, and the villages were wrapped in silence. In the churches only the ever-burning lamps still blazed, and he made them his resting places. The clock in the church steeple of Altenau struck 12 as he passed through. A belated tippler approached him with the reeling step of a drunkard, but started back when he saw his face, staring after him with dull, bewildered eyes, as if he beheld some spectre of the night. An image of horror I glide through the land, Freya murmured softly. Tonight he did not sing his song. This evening his pain was soothed, his soul was preparing for another paean, on the cross. Now the little church of Kappel appeared before him on its green hill, like a pious sign, post pointing the way to Ammergau. But patches of snow still lingered amid the pale green of the spring foliage, for it is late ere the winter is conquered by the milder season, and the keen wind swept down the broad highway, making the wayfarer's teeth chatter with cold. He felt that his vital warmth was nearly exhausted. He had walked 2 days with no hot food. For the soup at the parsonage that day was merely lukewarm. He stood still a moment. Surely he had dreamed that. He could not have begged for bread. Yes, it was even so. A tremor shook his limbs. Have you fallen so low? He tried to button his thin coat. His fingers were stiff with cold. 10 years ago when he left Ammergau, it was midsummer. Now winter still reigned on the heights. Only let me not perish on the highway, he prayed. Only let me reach home. It was now bright, cold moonlight. All the outlines of the mountains stood forth distinctly. The familiar contours of the Ammergau peaks became more and more visible. Now he stood on the Ammer Bridge, where what might be termed the suburb of Ammergau, the hamlet of Lower Ammergau, begins. The moonlit river led the eye in a straight line to the centre of the Ammer Valley. There lay the sacred mountains of his home, the vast side scenes of the most gigantic stage in the world, the Koffel with its cross, and the other peaks. Opposite on the left, the quiet chapel of St. Gregory, amid boundless meadows, beside the fall of the Line, the Ammer's wilder sister. There he had watched his horses when a boy, down near the chapel where the blue gentians had garlanded his head when he flung himself on the grass, intoxicated by his own exuberant youth and abundance of life. He extended his arms as if he would fain embrace the whole infinite scene. Home, home, your lost son is returning. Receive him. Do not fall, ye mountains, and bury the beloved valley ere I reach it. One last effort, one short hour's walk. Hold out, wearied one, this 1 hour more. The highway from Lower Ammergau stretched endlessly toward the goal. On the right was the forest, on the left the fields where grew thousands of meadow blossoms, the Eden of his childhood, where a blue lake once lured him. So blue that he imagined it was reflecting a patch of the sky, but when he reached it, instead of water, he beheld a field of forget-me-nots. Oh, memories of childhood, reconciling angel of the tortured soul! There stands the cross on the boundary with the thorny bush whence Christ's crown was cut. How will you fare? Will the community receive you, admit you to the blissful union of home powers, if you sacrifice your heart's blood for it? Freya asked himself, and it seemed as if some cloud, some dark foreboding came between him and his home. Well for him, who no longer expects his reward from this world. What are men? They are all variable, and weak. Thou alone art the same. Thou who dost create the miracle from our midst. And thou, sacred soil of our ancestors, ye mountains from whose peaks blows the strengthening breath which animates our sublime work. It is not human beings, but ye who are home. Now the goal was gained. He was there. Before him in the moonlight lay the Passion Theatre, the consecrated space where once for hours he was permitted to feel himself a god. And the poor, cast-off man, deceived in all things, flung himself down, kissed the earth, and laid a handful of it on his head, as though it were the hand of a mother, while from his soul gushed like a song sung by his own weeping guardian angel. Thy soil I kiss, beloved home, which erst my father's feet have trod, where the good seed devoutly sown sprang forth at the command of God. Thy lap fain would I rest upon, though faithlessly from thee. I fled still thy chains draw thy wandering son. O mother, back where'er his feet may tread. And though no ray of light, no star, illumes the future, and its gloom, thou wilt not grudge, after life's war, a clod of earth upon my tomb. He rested his head thus a long time on the cold earth, but he no longer felt it. It seemed as though the soul had consumed the last power of the exhausted body, and bursting its fetters blazed forth like an aureole. "Hosanna! Hosanna!" rang through the air, and the earth trembled under the tramp of thousands. On they came in a long procession, bearing palm branches, the shades of the fathers, the old actors in the Passion play from its commencement, and all who had lived and died for the cross since the time of Christ. Hosanna! Hosanna to him who died on the cross. Many are called, but few chosen. But you belong to us, sang the chorus of martyrs till the notes rang through earth and heaven. Hosanna! Hosanna to him who suffers and bleeds for the sins of the world. Freya raised his head. The moon had gone behind a cloud, and white mists were gathering over the fields. He rose, shivering with cold. His thin coat was damp with the night frost which had melted on his uncovered breast, and his feet were sore, for his shoes were worn out by the long walk. He still fancied he could hear, far away in the infinite distance, the chorus of the Hosanna to the crucified. And raising his arms to heaven, he cried, "O my Redeemer and Master, so long as thou dost need me to show the world thy face, let me live. Then take pity on me, and let me die on the cross, die for the sins of one, as thou didst die for the sins of the world." He opened the door leading to the stage. There in the dim moonlight lay the old cross. Sobbing aloud, he embraced it, pressing to his breast the hard wood which had supported him, and now, as of yore, was surrounded by the mysterious powers which so strongly attracted him. "Oh, had I been but faithful to thee," he lamented, "all the blessings of this world, even were it the greatest happiness, would not outweigh thee. Now I am thine. Praise thyself with me, and bear me upward, high above all earthly woe." The clock in the church steeple struck 3. He must still live and suffer, for he knew that no one could play the Christus as he did, because no one bore the Redeemer's image in his heart like him. But could he go farther? His strength had failed. He felt it with burdened breast. He took up his hat and staff and tottered out. Where should he go? To Ludwig Gross, the only person to whom he was not ashamed to show himself in his wretchedness. Now for the first time he realized that he could scarcely move farther. Yet it must be done. He could not lie there. Step by step he dragged himself in his torn shoes along the rough village street. When halfway down he heard music and singing alternating with cries and laughter echoing from the tavern. It was a wedding, and they were preparing to escort the bride and groom home. He learned this from the talk of some of the lads who came out. Was he really in Ammergau? His soul was yet thrilling with emotion at the sight of the home for which he had so long yearned, and now, this contrast. Yet it was natural. They could not all devote themselves to their task with the same fervour. Yet it doubly wounded the man who bore in his heart such a solemn earnestness of conviction. He glided noiselessly along in the shadow of the houses, that no one should see him. Did not the carousers notice that their Christ was passing in beggar's garb? Did they not feel the gaze bent on them from the shadow, through the lighted window, silently asking, "Are these the descendants of those ancestors whose glorified spirits had just greeted the returning son of Amagol?" The unhappy wanderer's step passed by unheard, and now Freya turned into the side street, where his friend's house stood, the luckless house where his doom began. It was not quite 3:30. The confused noise did not reach the quiet street. The house, shaded by its broad, projecting roof, lay as if wrapped in slumber. Except during the Passion, Ludwig always slept in the room on the ground floor, formerly occupied by the Countess. Freya tapped lightly on the shutter, but his heart was beating so violently that he could scarcely hear whether anyone was moving within. If his friend should not be there, had gone away on a journey or moved, what should he do then? He had had no communication with him, and only heard once through Josepha that old Andreas Gross was dead. He knocked again. Ludwig was the only person whom he could trust. If he had lost him, all would be over. But no, there was a movement within. The well-known voice asked sleepily, "Who is there?" Ludwig opened the window. "It is I, Freya," he called under his breath. The shutters were flung back. "Freya, is it possible? Wait, Joseph, wait, I'll admit you." He heard his friend hurriedly dressing, 2 minutes after the door opened. Not a word was exchanged between the two men. Ludwig grasped Freya's hand and drew him into the house. "Freya? You! Am I dreaming? You here? What brings you? I'll have a light directly." His hand trembled with excitement as he lighted a candle. Freya stood timidly at the door. The room grew bright. The rays streamed full on Freya. Ludwig started back in horror. Merciful heaven, how you look!" The friends long stood face to face, unable to utter a word, Freya still holding his hat in his hand. Ludwig's keen eye glided over the emaciated form, the shabby coat, the torn shoes. "Freya, Freya, what has befallen you, my poor friend? Do you return to me thus?" With unutterable grief he clasped the unfortunate man in his arms. Freya could scarcely speak, his tongue refused to obey his will. "If I could rest a little while," he faltered. "Yes, come and lie down on my bed. I have slept as much as I wish. I shall not lie down again," replied Ludwig, trembling with mingled pity and alarm as he drew off his friend's miserable rags as quickly as possible. Then, leading him to his own bed, he gently pressed him down upon it. He would not weary the exhausted man with questions. He saw that Freya was no longer master of himself. His condition told his friend enough. "You are kind," stammered Freya. "Oh, I have learned something in the outside world." "What? What have you learned?" asked Ludwig. A strange smile flitted over Freya's face. "To beg." His friend shuddered. "Don't talk any more now. You need rest," he said in a low, soothing tone, wrapping the chilled body in warm coverlets. But a flash of noble indignation sparkled in his eyes, and his pale lips could not restrain the words, "I will ask no questions, but whoever sent you home to us must answer for it to God." The other did not hear, or if he did his thoughts were too confused to understand. "Freya, only tell me what I can do to strengthen you. I'll make a fire and give you anything to eat that you would like." "Whatever you have," Freya gasped with much difficulty. "May God help us. He is starving." Ludwig could scarcely control his tears. "Keep quiet, I'll come presently and bring you something," he said, hurrying out to get all the modest larder contained. He would not wake his sisters. This was no theme for feminine gossip. He soon prepared with his own hands a simple bread porridge into which he broke a couple of eggs. He had nothing else, but at least it was warm food. When he took it to his friend, Freya had grown so weak that he could scarcely hold the spoon, but the nourishment evidently did him good. "Now sleep," said Ludwig. "Day is dawning. I'll go down to the village and see if I can get you some boots and another coat." A mute look of gratitude from Freya rewarded the faithful care. Then his eyes closed, and his friend gazed at him with deep melancholy.